Welcome everybody to the first panel session for Coach Bowles question and answer sessions. I'm Amanda Swin-Purcell, the coaching manager for Coach Bowles Limited, and I'm really pleased to welcome our panel of experts today. We have Ellen Faulkner, triple Commonwealth gold medalist and world indoor champion. Hi. We have John Rednall, the most capped player for Bowles England and the England Academy coach. We have John McGuinness, high performance manager for Bowles England. Mal Evans, the Director of Coaching for Bowles England, and Brian Baker, the Director of Coaching for English Short Mat Bowling Association. Welcome everybody, and thanks very much for your time. We're going to crack straight off with a question. It's quite a complicated question, this one, from Anthony Roberts, and I'm going to read what he says. Anthony asks for a detailed and technical clarification on the following characteristics of a bowl delivered along the same aim line but at different lengths. He says we are told by manufacturers and bowls coaching books that a bowl with a certain draw, bowled at say 1 o'clock and at a minimum length, will draw to the centre line. Then by keeping the same aiming line, but increasing the weight by say 1 metre at a time, all the way through to maximum length, then the bowl will still constantly finish on the centre line, irrespective of length. So what's everyone's thoughts on that?
Well, perhaps if I kick off with that one, it seems like a complicated question, but actually it's relatively simple. In fact, what you alluded to is the bias in all four balls is constant. And so therefore, it's about delivering the ball down your aiming line until we get to its shoulder for the bias to take effect. On its track down to the shoulder, obviously, any ball that's put onto a surface induces friction. And until that friction starts to slow down, and then it lets the bias take effect, nothing can happen. But once the friction slows enough, then the bias will take effect and the ball will draw back off the arc. Now that's assuming that obviously we've got a decent playing surface, for example, an indoor where there are fewer imperfections than shall we say that on an outdoor green. So by dint of that, if we carry on down the line as the question alluded and bowl to a medium length, by bowling down the same aiming line, we need to increase the pace that which we deliver the ball. But again, because it's traveling further, there will be increased friction, in which case it'll take longer for the ball to get to its shoulder. But at the same time, once the friction comes off the ball, then the arc of that ball will continue. Now, as all four balls in the set have the same drawing line, then it will drop back onto that center line where the first ball finished. Ergo, if we follow that through, right through until we get to a full length jack, then it's no problem. I said one of the common fallacies that a lot of people have, especially indoors, shorter length jacks, people tend to bowl a little bit tighter because they don't think it's quite as far, and therefore they don't need to send it as wide. But the bias of the ball will take effect if we bowl inside the arc that we've decided on. Invariably, that ball will end up being tight across the head.
Great, thanks, Mal. Anybody else have anything for that one?
I think, Amanda, there's obviously a few differences between indoor and outdoor in this regard as well. I think Mal point there about common mistake that people play the short jack tight is very true, particularly indoors. But I think with outdoor greens, you've also got the added challenge of the different playing surface. So, for example, around the sort of 2 metre mark in a lot of outdoor greens where a lot of people have been standing, it tends to be quite compact. And therefore, when a ball gets to that point, it'll probably both run on a little bit further and maybe bend a little bit more as well, as opposed to in the middle of a green where it tends maybe not to get as much wear and might be a little bit softer, and therefore the bend at the end in particular may not be as pronounced as what I've just described. So that is another way of kind of clouding that biomechanical question, a technical question that Miles explained. But there's absolutely no doubt what he's explained there with regards to the bowl bending under normal standard circumstances is definitely the case. The way to prove that is to use a ramp, is to just go to your your indoor club in particular and get a ramp out if they've got one, and put a bowl down there from the top of the ramp and see where it finishes, and then to put a bowl down from the middle of the ramp and let it roll down and see where it finishes using the same plane, and it'll prove to you that the bowl comes back to the same center line spot.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, just to elaborate a bit more on the eccentricities of the outdoor rink. There are times where you'll actually find that there's more than one way to the jack. And what tends to happen, Amanda, is that sometimes there's a narrow way to the jack, but if you go a bit wider, you pick up a little sort of difference in level where you actually play back down the slope. And I know that happens on Crown Green, they do it all the time. But there are some greens which, particularly when they're just played on one setting all the time, and it's a really good local advantage here, where the players know that there's more than one line to the jack.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, our next question is from David Ewins from Merrow Village Bowls Club. He asks, is it possible to have some discussion about specific warm-up and cool-down exercises? He says if there was some agreement, could videos be made and maybe added to a YouTube channel? This may encourage more bowlers to take them and the sport seriously and avoid injury. Do the panel have any favourite bowling practice exercises that they could share? So Mal, I'm going to come to you first.
It almost beat us to the punch. The fact that because we've been in lockdown and everything, we've been scrambling around trying to sort sorts of things that we can keep people occupied. And I think this is a great question. And the fact of the matter is, it's something that we aren't particularly good at, and we're playing catch up on, and that is to warm up correctly for this game. But we are currently in a position looking at trying to put together some clips where we can demonstrate specific warm-ups, both dynamic stretching and static stretching and cool downs. And hopefully we'll be able to put something together pretty shortly and get it up onto the channel.
Excellent. And I'm going to put people on the spot. So John Rednall, what's your favourite warm-up exercise?
Well, Amanda, I actually have two forms of warm-ups. The first ones are the ones that I would do at running club. So they're things like the heel flicks and the calf stretches and the hamstring stretches and so on. But then also there are some warm-ups and some coordination exercises that I would use, which are basically emulating your bowling action. So you're doing these without the bowl. For instance, forward lunges, because most of us step forward with our leading leg. There's another really good one where you do your natural bowling action without the bowl, and you just flick the grass or the carpet with your middle finger, just to ensure that you're warmed up and you're supple and you're low enough to the ground. And so there are two sorts, the general warm-ups, but also the coordination exercises based on your delivery action.
Excellent. And Ellen, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay. Have you got a favourite warm-up exercise?
Oh, a favourite one. I think I would go for the hamstring. And that's really because at the point of delivery, all of your weight is on one leg. So if I was going to prioritise, it would be warming up my hamstrings, followed by my quadriceps. So doing the leg-based exercises. And I think the other thing that I would add to that is the warm-up is not just about preparing your body for competition. It's actually that start of the process of preparing your mind. So getting yourself in that mindset to compete. And that's why it's really important in terms of an all-round or holistic approach to getting yourself ready to compete.
Absolutely, Ellen. And John McGuinness, anything that you particularly like doing during warm-ups?
Well, most people would be expecting me to say my warm-up involved being in the bar or something like that. But the reality is, as a sport, we are notoriously bad at warming up before matches. Let's be honest. I mean, I think there are some people that do it more diligently than others, and I see teams both nationally and internationally doing it better than others. But there's almost an embarrassment factor that comes into play with this. And I think everyone that knows, that plays the game will understand that. Sometimes we just don't give ourselves enough time to warm up. We don't give ourselves enough. We don't arrive at the green with enough time. I'm guilty of that myself. A lot of people would probably be laughing if they're listening to this, but we don't arrive at enough time. And to do any kind of warm-up. And I think the other danger is to do warm-ups that you aren't familiar with, and to put your body through some kind of a warm-up that you haven't sort of done gently at home, first of all, to make sure that you don't cause yourself any injury or stress or anything like that. So I think I would encourage people to do it more frequently than they do, because ultimately, we do play. It's a dynamic sport, and we're using muscles that if you don't warm them up properly, quite simply, you can cause yourself an injury. And more importantly, you can probably get into a situation where if you're not fit for the first few ends, you can cause yourself a problem in the scoreline in the match. So the first few ends are just as important as the last few.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. And Brian, anything different with short mats?
No, there isn't really anything different with short mat. I mean, for warm-up, I believe that if you're warming your right side of the body, you mustn't forget the left side. So balance is important.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is from Gary Wilson, and he's asking a general question about delivery. Should the backhand and forehand deliveries be the same? Where's the best area to release the ball, for example, near the toes? Is the difference between the weight of a short versus a long jack indoors down to body weight or arm or both? And he goes on to say, a bit cheeky to ask 3 questions about the delivery, but I'm getting bolder in my old age. Well, Gary, we'll allow you that little bit to be that little bit cheeky and ask your 3 questions. And John McGuinness, let's come to you first.
Good question, Gary, indeed. I think the first point to make here, Amanda, is that everybody is different. So everybody's a different shape, different size, different balance, different strengths, weaknesses, physically, etc. So there are lots of people out there that have a favourite hand, and more often than not, that's in their mind more than anything else, that they can play the forehand better than the backhand. But strictly speaking, from a pure biomechanical point of view, both deliveries from a forehand and a backhand are the same, i.e. your positioning on the mat, where your feet and your hips and your shoulders are pointing, the step forward and the backswing and the follow through and the delivery are all biomechanically the same. But I think this is where there might be some differences again between Southern Hemisphere players and players in, for example, in the Northern Hemisphere in our home countries here, where the Southern Hemisphere players tend to be taught in a very static position, and that's because of the fast greens that they play on, where a lot of the deliveries here in the UK are much more athletic, to be able to cope with the varying surfaces. Although I say that whenever a lot of our bowlers are able to cope with playing fast indoor and slower outdoor surfaces just as well. So I think we're at an advantage there from that point of view. But biomechanically, I think that both the deliveries are forehand and backhand are pretty much the same.
Anyone else got anything to add on that one?
Well, I think if looking at the delivery, and John didn't allude to the technicalities, but really and truly, there's no difference between the forehand and the backhand. If we talk about the release of the ball and the release point, we're looking at coming through from the backswing all the way through to follow through. Then the ball really should be released at the furthest point that it reaches of the ground. So in other words, as the backswing starts, that arm is going to follow through with a pendulum action down the target line. And usually the point of release will be with the arm is straight and it is directly below the shoulder, adjacent to the front foot. Most of the time, it shouldn't really have to change in any way, either on the forehand or on the backhand. Provided that can actually happen, then the bowler will get the ball away in a decent manner.
Excellent. John Rednall, anything else? How about clarifying between longer and shorter bowls for us?
Yes, I think instinctively, when we go from a short jack to a long jack, we probably do it without thinking, but there are major things that happen. The first thing is that when we play to a longer jack, our step forward is probably a bit longer. Our backswing is probably a bit bigger, And then crucially, the tempo of the follow through is quicker when you need to generate more pace with the bowl. So I think when you play over a short distance, your step forward might be smaller, your back swing smaller, so that you're using perhaps more of the lower arm rather than a full swing, although there are some very good players that use big back swings even on very quick greens. But then the tempo, you slow everything down. So on a quick green, you would slow it down. There's a really good exercise here that I've done. You've seen Amanda with the academy students there. And that is to bowl a jab, or indeed a bowl, just over 5 meters to your partner's toe. And that's very difficult to do. You know, to hold it back and to roll it so gently that it only goes to your partner's toe. What tends to happen is that you use minimal movement. You might not even step forward. And then you increase that 5 meter distance to 8 meters, and then 11, and then 14, and so on. And you'll find that as you're doing that, your sensitivity to changing length becomes better and better. And then the hardest one to do, obviously, is to go from a very short distance to a very long distance. And that's the one which needs the most adapting.
Amanda, can I ask Brian a question on that?
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you, I used to play short mat bowls when I was a kid. I loved it because it really was the only thing to do in the wintertime. But there are differences between the forehand and the backhand in short mat because of the way you've got to keep your feet within the lines, Brian. Is that right?
Yeah, on a mat, there are 2 delivery lines, one on the backhand and one on the forehand. Your feet are not allowed to go outside of those lines, but your delivery point can be. So you can alter your stance, and this is one of the reasons why fundamentally the arm swing movement is exactly the same as is the point of delivery as the other bowls codes, but you do tend to be a static stance, right? And that is purely and simply because sometimes you are delivering your wood at an angle that is outside those 2 delivery lines. So although your feet can't go outside, your arms and your delivery point can.
That sounds as if you've got to be quite flexible to be able to sort of cross legs and cross over, and sounds like playing a game of Twister.
Yes, there are shall we say, some twisting stances. And there are some also praying mantis type stances.
Right.
Excellent, thank you. Well, that was very similar actually to a question from Anthony Brooks, who was also asking for 2 top tips really on gaining length. His question was, just to clarify, does the longer swing mean more distance and a shorter swing mean less distance? And the same, does a longer step mean more distance, and does a shorter step mean less distance? Just to clarify, is that what we're saying? John, your microphone.
If you take the firing action, for instance, of some of the world's best driving players, and I think about David Bryan when he adopted the upright firing action. Peter Bellis, probably known as one of the best drivers in the whole game. When they do their firing action, their step forward is very big. Their backswing is huge. I remember Peter Bellis's was up above the horizontal norm. But then also the speed of follow through and the power from the forearm in the release just meant that they generated so much. Now, Brian was talking about obviously the short mat. You don't need to step forward because you don't need the impetus. You don't need to generate that extra energy. So you would work off a static delivery.
You know, Amanda, an interesting one there is a little exercise. People often ask about weight, and how do you find the right weight? And finding the right weight is a kind of a natural ability to find the right weight. If you stood 5 meters away from someone with a tennis ball and asked them to throw it to you, they would just naturally judge the distance and throw it to you. if you were 5 meters away. If you then went 1 meter away and asked them to do the same thing, they would alter the swing of their hand and throw the tennis ball with a much less of a backswing. So it comes naturally to do that. I think what I would recommend most bowlers try to avoid is shoving the ball and causing any jerkiness that might cause you to put it offline. So the smoother you can get your delivery by altering the backswing in order to change the speed that you put it up, the better. So that's all about practice. That really is.
Right. Okay, our next question then, thank you for that. Brian Hyland asked the panel how a coach can support a mid-career bowler to be more consistent. He asks us, what is the most important thing? Is it practice, concentration, technically correct delivery, attitude, determination, the correct bowls, the correct grip? Which one is it?
All of the above, Brian.
Okay, thanks. So which one's the most important then to you?
But probably more important, and as a coach for me, is a delivery that repeats constantly, time and time and time and time again.
So it is that consistency of delivery.
Absolutely, 100%.
John Rednall, anything?
Yes, definitely. As Mal said, it's every facet of the delivery. It's the way you grip the bowl, so you have to grip the bowl the same each time. It's the angle of your step. So if you're trying to replicate your previous delivery, obviously you need to step forward in the same direction, the same angle. Your backswing needs to be the same speed, the same tempo, and it needs to be the same length. And there's a really good exercise here, which I use when I'm just practicing on my own, but also I do with beginners and better players actually, which is where you deliver your first bowl, not even to a jab, you just deliver your first bowl, and you press your memory button on your forehead, and you try and then replicate it, you emulate it in every single way. Now, if you do that, your second bowl obviously will finish alongside your first one. If it doesn't finish alongside the first one, you've done something different. So you then have to ask yourself, what did I do differently? Did I release the bowl too soon? Did I release it too late? Did it bump? Did it wobble? There are so many things that can change where that bowl actually finishes. And so then you would do that with your third delivery. You try and replicate it again, and your fourth delivery again. And that's a very, very good grouping exercise. But it does mean that you've got to be consistent with every part of that delivery action.
John McGuinness, you've got something here on consistency, I think.
Well, I think the coach, Brian's asked the question about how the coach can help, and I think that one of the first things the coach has to do is identify, well, exactly what is the bowler not consistent at? You know, is it line? Is it length? Is it a short jack, a long jack, a drive? What is it? So once you understand that and then identify where there are things that need to be worked upon, then it's about doing relevant and measurable practice. And I think that that's the only way you can identify whether you're becoming consistent or not, is to measure something. And then, as John Rednall just pointed out, and saying, well, I'm not doing that often enough. So that will come up with some statistics, 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 5 or whatever it may be. And then you work on trying to improve that by giving advice on stability or balance or technique, whatever it may be. But I think that, we unfortunately we have a sport where there isn't really much of a coaching culture. So it would be encouraging if Brian has got people that are actually willing and keen to work on consistency. And I think it's all about identifying what to work on and to do measurable practice to ensure that you then achieve that. Because then I think the player will identify, I'm doing that better because I'm now getting 4 out of 5, where before I was only getting 1.
Absolutely. And another question we had was from Ross Turnbull, which was very, very similar. Ross says he likes to go down and practice by himself a couple of times a week. for about 30 to 40 minutes a session, and how could he better utilise that time? So he only plays outdoors, and how could he better use his practice time when he goes down to that green?
If I jump in, sorry. As John alluded to, I think the biggest thing you've got, if you're 30, 40 minutes, you cannot come down there without a plan in your mind as to what you're actually trying to achieve. So in other words, you've already thought about exactly what you're going to work on before you get there. And then you actually have your skill drill or whatever you want to do, and then you actually follow that. In a 30 or 40 minute session, I agree with John totally. Something that can actually be measurable will then allow you to come back at another stage, revisit that session, do the same drill again, and measure how better or worse that you've actually got. But if you don't have a relevant plan as to what it is you want to achieve, then 30 or 40 minutes would become a wasted time, because it's not a long time. So really something that's focused so that you can really pay attention to what you're trying to achieve.
And that focus can come from the position that you play in. So the amount of times I see skips going down to the bowls club and playing to a jack in the middle of the green with no bowls in front or any obstacles, that is just not akin to reality. So we need to be practicing to be fit for purpose for the role that we're playing, recognising that everybody should be able to play every position, but focus on specific things. As Mal has said, go down with a purpose, with an intent on what to work on, and really, really tailor your drills around that.
Just taking the word consistency there, the big problem, of course, is that some people consistently do things wrong, and they still don't know why their bowl doesn't do what they try to do with it, you know. And that's where a coach would come in very useful. You know, quite often people say, well, no, that didn't go where I wanted it to. What did I do wrong? I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So to consistently make the same error, but not knowing why, won't be identified.
Great. Okay, next question is from Mark Addison. It's quite a quick question, this one. How can you use technology to support bowls coaching? So who would like to answer that one?
I could probably make a start on that, Amanda. I think that video technology has been around for a long time, both in bowls, but it's gone leaps and bounds in a lot of sports. And there's some really great apps out there, like Huddle is a good one. Dartfish is another one. I know tennis use Dartfish a lot, and they tend to be very useful to be able to analyze people's technical strengths and weaknesses, and to be able to show people back where they may be doing things that they weren't aware of. It can also be very useful, not just from a technical point of view, but from a sort of tactical point of view as well, from a point of view of people's body language, and seeing how people behave in a rink, or how they're communicating with each other, or how they're reacting to a certain situation that happens. And sometimes you can't put that into words. You just basically say, let's have a look at this, and what do you think about that? And then they probably answer saying, we had no idea that that's how we stood, that's how we reacted, that's what we did. So I think video analysis has got a real part to play in that. And I think the other answer would be on statistics. You know, statistics can aid, and I just want to really emphasize the aid coaching, because it shouldn't be the measure of everything. It should be something that aids other parameters. But certainly looking at statistics, a classic example would be just looking at a scorecard and identifying, you know, patterns in the game. And if that pattern exists quite often for a particular team or a particular rink or a particular singles player, you know, a bad start or a bad middle or a good end, then that might be something that you could work on, identify things that you need to work on. So statistics can help as well, but I would be very wary about leaning too heavily on statistics. I think they need to be used in association with other things.
I'll second him in as well, Amanda. I'm a big believer as a coach is one picture, the old axiom, rather than 1,000 words. I can attest to that because I've been fortunate, I've been working with the Warwickshire Ladies John squad and working specifically with 4 players. Using huddle technique, really, they trying to make some technical points, specifically technical, but they were general ones as well. Making the comments, they understood everything. But it wasn't actually until they saw themselves on screen that the actual nuances were there. They were actually blown away by the fact that what I was saying to them, they could actually see it. And the improvements were remarkable. So I'm a big believer in use of technology. I think it's an absolute godsend because it can really pinpoint it, because anything that's visual really helps a bowler to actually see what you're trying to get across to them.
That's great, thank you. Okay, let's move on. Ian Rake asks from Swindon, he asks, bowlers have been able to stay fit during lockdown, which I am sure many people appreciate, he says. But what advice can the panel give for us bowlers to either maintain or develop our skills and techniques while we can't get to the green? Now, obviously, that's especially pertinent right now with lockdown and some clubs not being open and some clubs being indoors and not even being able to be open. So let's think outside the box. How can we maintain and improve our technique while we're in this situation? Ellen, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think the first thing to kind of recognise is that we know that everybody's in different situations at home. So some people have the luxury of a garden, other people won't. And actually you can be really creative with things around the home. So whilst, you know, the ideal might be to go out in your garden and to roll your bowl up and practice your delivery routine, you can do things inside as well. So you can use an orange, for example, to practice distance control. If anybody's got some little carpet bowls, then you can have a go with them. But there's different alternatives that you can use, so it doesn't have to be cost prohibitive. One of the things that I've done in the past is actually practice my delivery, but measure a credit card against my bowl, so that then you can put it in the midst of your two fingers and then use that as your delivery. And I know that I'm getting down low enough if I can hear just the scrape of the credit card on the floor, which would be that point of delivery.
Excellent.
I've used it because I don't play indoor bowls in the winter, and sometimes I need to keep myself in the mind for playing a game in the summer while we're waiting. And one of the things that I used to do, and I still do sometimes, in the hallway, I just lay a mirror against the bottom of the stairs so that I can actually see myself in the mirror, and then I actually replicate my delivery to see, one, whether or not the backswing is actually going back, is the pendulum coming through in a straight line, is my hand, to quote a coaching term, catching the raindrops when we're coming on the follow through. And we can make slight adjustments, obviously, as well. We can alter the position. We can just draw some lines on the floor. But it's just something that can keep you ticking over in those winter months, just to see whether or not everything is in place, ready for when you actually get out onto the outdoor green.
Anybody else?
Yes, please. I think the general fitness picture for most people in the lockdown has been a little bit worrying. I think lots of my friends on Facebook seem to be putting on weight and being quite worried about it. And I know that some of them now have made sure that they're walking more, and some of my friends that have never been jogging or running are now doing that. One thing that I would like to say, I've been doing lots of running and watching my weight as well. But when we go from indoors to outdoor bowling, which we obviously would have been and hopefully will be soon, is that quite often when you play your first game or your first practice outdoors, we use muscles that we haven't actually been using indoors with our delivery, because all of a sudden we have to generate that more length, because the greens at this time of the year are heavy, certainly compared with indoors anyway. And we use those different muscles, and then the day after, and I know this happened to me when I was a lot younger as well, but the next day we feel a few muscles aching a bit there that we just haven't used for a while. So the whole business about practicing your delivery and these coordination exercises that I believe in very much might just help with your overall fitness, but also your preparation for when you do get outside.
Anything else we need to be thinking about as well?
No, I was just going to say, would it be pertinent at this point to point out, obviously, everybody can access the Bowls England workouts that we've actually produced, and hopefully that will help them to be able to keep in shape, ready for what we're hoping, as John said, that we'll be able to get on the outdoor. But that should be something that is built in throughout the season and not just at the start of the season, just in terms of general health and fitness, never mind being ready to play both.
Do you know, Amanda, Ellen brought up a point there about playing carpet bowls, and she should know better because I've beaten her so many times at carpet bowls.
If you believe that, you'll believe anything.
And but it also means that, you know, keeping up your competitive spirit, I think, is quite important. You know, everyone talks about, you know, the physical side of what we're encountering with the lockdown, but the mental side is just as tough, and we're all missing that aspect of it as well, that competitive bit. So I live in a house full of 3 young lads who are competitive at everything. So that's still consistent in my life, believe me. But that's really important. The other thing I would encourage people to do, again, during the lockdown scenario, there's a lot of content on YouTube and on the internet that people can go and watch. You know, games, international matches from days gone by, up to most the recent things that happen in Australia or things that happen in the UK, the World Indoor Championships. There's a lot of content, and I think you can learn from all of that. You can watch stuff on the Waterloo on the Crown Green, and you can watch clips of short mat bowls as well on the internet. So you can pick up things about tactics, and you can pick up technical aspects as well by just watching people play. So there's things that you can do in that regard as well.
And I think just to add to that, you know, John mentioned family there. This is actually a great opportunity to connect with your family around bowls. You know, we're all at home. Just mimic the game. Doesn't have to be bowls. It could be tennis balls. It could be anything in your backyard or in your living room. So just kind of share the joy of the game, and hopefully reach out others who then might want to have a go when the greens reopen. I think the final point just to make, we talked about technology in a previous question. You know, this is a great time actually to get somebody to video your delivery if you have got the luxury of somebody else being at home, or if you can prop it up, because you will learn a lot, as Mal said earlier. So definitely take the time to really kind of deconstruct your game, your delivery, reflect, learn from others, but equally try and inspire and bring some other people with you throughout this period too.
That's a great positive note to end that question on. Thank you, Helen. Okay, Howard Jones asks, do you have a personal delivery routine? And if so, how important is this in relationship to a consistent delivery result? John Rednall, let's go to you first.
Yes, well, I think we all do have a routine, but for some of us, it's a fast thinking routine, it's spontaneous, it's instinctive. Certainly when I am working with not just juniors, but bowlers who are relatively new to the game, I like to employ this checklist kind of strategy. And by the checklist, what I mean is that you actually verbalize, you put into words everything that goes through your head before you start to deliver your bowl, even from the point of view, okay, I'm now going to pick my bowl up off the green, I'm now going to put it in my hand with a forehand grip, and when I step onto the mat, I'm looking at the length of the jack, I'm visualizing, I'm memorizing in my head how far away that jack is. I'm looking at a point on the green perhaps where I know that my bowl needs to travel over that little mark, over that little aiming point, if you like. And by verbalizing all of that with your person that you're working with, you can gauge their thought process very nicely. And that thought process becomes your routine, it becomes your checklist. And I've spoken to one or two people about this, and one person that I've been coaching said, oh, that's what HGV drivers do when they're learning to drive their lorries. They verbalize this checklist and all the things that they're doing in that process. But it certainly works very well, and works very well with the juniors that I've worked with.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I would just say that, you know, how John has articulated that is a really great tool to go through and share. It doesn't have to be within coach, it could be a club mate, just to kind of verbalise it and go through that process. And the reason it's really important is because of consistency. So every player will have one, they just might not be aware that they have one. And actually where, you know, your consistency unravels, so to speak, is when you're not following the same routine. So again, it comes back to getting your mind and your body ready to deliver and execute that shot. So it's really important that it is consistent. So doing what John has suggested is a great way to achieve that.
And I would actually go a bit further than that, because I would also get them to verbalise just after they've delivered the bowl what they think of it. So you might get this business of, oh no, I wobbled that one a bit, or I dropped that one, or that wasn't very smooth, or that's too heavy. Because then you know that the bowler that you're working with is reflecting immediately on how they're feeling about their delivery. You could also verbalise how they feel as their bowler's going up the green. So yes, I'm on target. I think this has got a chance. I've got it. Because that's what actually goes through our heads when we're actually playing the game. And so all it means is that we verbalise the process.
What it does, sorry John, what it does is make sure you're actually present and in the moment. Now the amount of people that, you know, will stand on a different place in the mat every time, where you stand is going to reflect where your release point is. So being present and being aware will improve your effectiveness without a shadow of a doubt.
I also think you're in this sort of little bubble. You know, when you're going through your routine of your delivery, you've got this bubble around you, and, you know, nobody else can get into that. That's your concentration, that's your thought process. It doesn't belong to anybody else. So when you do it without verbalizing, nobody can hear what your thoughts are.
Most top players, Amanda, go through a routine without even knowing it and have it sort of teed off. I think if you videoed a lot of top players, you videoed them repeating their delivery, you would see they're doing exactly the same thing every single time, but they're doing it without thinking about it. They're almost an automatic pilot, but it can break down. It can break down, and unfortunately, and this applies to all aspects of our sport, indoor, outdoor, short mat, crown green, etc. We sometimes play too much, and we can end up getting bad habits, and we can end up losing our routine and picking bad habits up that affect our performances. So it's really important that if that starts to happen, that you go back to understanding what your routine is and reapplying it, and then getting back to that unconscious sort of delivery and that unconscious sort of just getting on and doing things that you're good at.
Right, thank you.
If I just say, if we just go back to something we said about delivery, it's going to repeat itself time and time and time again. Your pre-match routine, your pre-delivery routine is going to be the same. If there's a break in there, then your thought process has actually been broken, and therefore you won't deliver what you want. So therefore, if the delivery has to repeat, then your pre-shot routine should also repeat.
Brilliant. Okay, Malcolm Dick asks, what changes, if any, do you make to your normal bowling technique when faced with bowling in very wet conditions, in particular in heavy rain, when it's almost impossible to keep your bowls dry? What are your thoughts?
I think Brian from Short Mat should answer this one.
Yeah, it would be go indoors.
Onto a short mat. Let's put John Rednall on the spot.
Yes, if we take the scenario where you're playing in heavy rain, everybody's different, I guess, but to go through what I do, if it's just wet, I don't actually wipe my bowls with a cloth. If you get grass cuttings and moisture on your bowls, then I do, because I think the grass cuttings make it very, very difficult to control your bowl. But I've explored this a few times in the rain, practicing in the rain. But what I tend to do is our middle finger should be running down the center of the bowl anyway. And so that's the first thing, just to make sure that your middle finger is central. What I then do is I widen the fingers either side of your middle finger, so that you've actually just pushed them out a little bit further. That seems to give me a better grip. And then if it really is saturated, you know, where your bowl makes that dreadful noise as soon as it comes out of your hand, just to make sure that your delivery action is as smooth as you can possibly get it. And maybe not just because it's heavy, but just make sure that your backswing is really, or your pendulum action is really, really smooth, because you don't want that jerkiness at the end and the ball comes out of your hand all wrong. So you need to make sure your grip's right, widen your bowls if you need to, certainly get the grass cuttings off. That's the way that I would deal with it.
I would just say, you know, it's a really personal thing. For me, the key bit is about being prepared. So people often take the mickey out of me because I've always got a big cloth bag in the car along with 100 layers of clothing. That is a bit of an exaggeration, but for those who know me, know that I get cold. So it's about being prepared and organised. So for me personally, I do like to wipe my bowl. But that said, you know, I have practiced in the rain to know in my own mind that actually, if that isn't working, that I can then still deliver the bowl, and I can deliver the bowl with confidence. So it's about being prepared, and it's also about communicating with your teammates. You know, so if it is cold and wet, I always keep my right hand in my pocket, try and keep it dry, try and keep it as warm as possible. For some, that would mean my body language looks awful and they would think I've got the hump with my teammates. So it's a case of saying to my teammates, you know, I haven't got the hump, you'll get the encouragement verbally, but you're not going to get too much clapping. And it's just being honest about the realities of how you cope with different situations, and yeah, communicating that to those that you're playing with.
You know, Amanda, I grew up in Northern Ireland, so I'm an expert playing in the rain. I love playing in the rain. But you know, the reality there, Ellen made a really good point about people being prepared, and that's a key aspect of it, having the right equipment, the right waterproofs, etc. But I would always say to someone that it's really important just to take your time in the wet. Take a little bit of extra time, and it might be to wipe your bowl or whatever, or it might be to allow you know, that gust with rain coming down just to pass, or it just might be just that few extra seconds on the mat to just prepare yourself and make sure you don't make a silly mistake of the ball slipping out, or you slipping on the mat, or, you know, water coming onto your face at the wrong time. Just a little bit of extra time, I think, is really important. And I think the other point that you know, Ellen alluded to that she does, that I don't think very many people do, is we don't practice in the wet. How are you going to get better at playing in the wet if you don't go out and practice in the wet? We think about going out to practice, and then if it's raining, we go, oh, we're not doing that. When really you should go out and practice in the wet. Especially in this country, we have to play in the wet quite a lot. So I think it would be advisable to go out and practice in the wet.
For me, John, there's only one thing worse than playing in the wet, and that is to play in really strong winds. And playing where I do at Felixstowe, the green never plays the same twice. Ellen will know this, she's been to Felixstowe. You know, one day there's a headwind, another day it's a tailwind, another day it's a crosswind where you're bowling one side straight and a huge swing on the other because the wind impacts itself so much on the bowl. And when you're bowling in, you know, a very, very strong wind, you can deliver that bowl as well as you like, but if the wind blows, it will take it all over the place.
Well, I mean, I think that there's lots of examples where the wind can take effect for a bowl, and especially if you think about how they cope with it in the Southern Hemisphere and the fast greens in the Southern Hemisphere, and where the wind can come and basically gust past you and actually hit a building at the other side of the green and come back up the green and have an impact on the bowl. So, you know, there's all sorts of challenges whenever you've got adverse weather conditions, but the experienced player out there will know to take their time and to assess those things, to look at fluttering flags, to look at where the rain's coming in, to just make sure they're properly prepared so they don't make mistakes. It's really as simple as that.
Brilliant. Okay, our next question comes from Mick Over, who asks us, do you or your team intend in the future to tour the counties to coach the coaches? He says, although I like to think that I can help someone learn to play this wonderful game, I have not been assessed in 10 years. Before I hand over to the panel on that one, I'm going to add that Coach Bowles actually was in the process of establishing some sessions that could be delivered throughout the country, as well as going out on a roadshow type event for coaches to get together. In the current circumstances, obviously that's been paused and put on hold for a little while, but we are looking at some online opportunities for coaches to come together as communities and learn from each other. So keep an eye on our website and social media pages is what I would say. But Mal, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, further to what you say, because we've obviously been in discussions about this, and the plan was that we were going to try and go to for Bowls England this year and do some regional stuff, to do some roadshows around how coaching has actually moved forward, and how we actually try to get people into coaching in a certain way. Obviously, the situation has put a block on that, but that is something that we are very keen to explore, and hopefully, once we do finally get out of the situation that we're in, it is something that Bowls England are keen to look to put in place, possibly not this year, but maybe next year.
But there will definitely be those online opportunities through Coach Bowls. So like I say, keep your eyes open for that one. Okay, the next question.
In terms of getting out and about, Mal and I in particular have been with other county associations. So I've had the pleasure of working with Gloucestershire Johns Trophy ladies, and also Northamptonshire. I've worked with the Hertfordshire under-25 squad, the Bowls Academy, the Bowls England Academy, and the Suffolk Johns Trophy squad, and I'm also Middleton Cup manager for Suffolk. So I think Mal is obviously working with Warwickshire as well. We've got things planned. I was going to Wootton Bassett to do a session with them before the lockdown. So I think we are getting out there.
Definitely, it's getting out there and coaching the bowlers, and also getting out there and supporting the coaches as well, isn't it? So, all right. So, Paul Debenham asks, I mainly concentrate on drawing shots and running bowls with a good success rate, but have problems with full-out driving shots. I don't always agree that this type of shot is regarded as the best option, but sometimes this may be the only option. What would be the best way to achieve accurate driving shots? John McGuinness, what do you think?
Drive shot. Do you know, it is such an important shot in the modern game, because inevitably you're having to play this when you're in trouble. So you best be good at it if you have to play it. Sometimes it's used to take a ball out, of course, but inevitably you're having to play this shot because you're in a heap of trouble. People don't go out and practice the shot enough. In actual fact, if people do go out and practice the shot, they often get frowned upon. You know, if they're banging balls up the green, people on the next rink are looking over and saying, "What are you doing?" But you're practicing a shot that you really need to be good at. Whether you're a singles player or a back-end player, you need to be able to play that shot. I think the key in that shot, and there are lots of examples of people that have been really, really good at it. And John Rednall mentioned people like David Bryant and Peter Bellis, and you've got Ryan Bester from Canada, who's now plays his bowls in Australia, who's also renowned for being able to play the drive shot very, very well. But the key is to be able to get the balance between the speed and the accuracy. Because there's absolutely no point wanging it up there at 100 mile an hour if you haven't got any accuracy there. So getting that balance between being able to get enough pace in to achieve what you want and being able to be accurate is something that you have to work on yourself. There's no magic formula for this. I think that technically, obviously, there are things that you can work on with regards to your positioning on the mat and making sure you give yourself room to be able to get your backswing away, because we talked about earlier about being able to have that sort of smooth pendulum approach, and the further back you go, and the smoother the delivery can be without kind of jolting at it, and you've got to try and work on that. And so there's things that I think a coach can do with a player to get their positioning right on the mat. Sometimes it is to do with the grip as well. I mean, even on the talking about the positioning, and John, you mentioned one of the legends of the English game and of the world game, David Bryant, who tended to, when he was driving, to have an upright stance, and the ball sort of stretched out where he was aiming. And quite often, if he was doing on a draw shot, he'd be in a crouched position. Although he sometimes had an upright position on a heavier green when he was drawing, but he most definitely, whenever he was playing that drive shot, he was in an upright position. So creating your own little formula that works for you with regards to getting that balance between speed and accuracy, and the little things that you might need to change with your grip or your delivery in order to be accurate with the drive, is key. And most importantly, the most important aspect of playing this shot is to be mentally focused and confident at playing it. A lot of people go in to play that shot without having the confidence of being able to actually achieve what they want to achieve with it. That is as important as anything technical. So if you're going to play that shot, you commit to it and you back yourself to get it. And that's really important aspect of the drive shot as well.
Just to come back on the great David Bryan drive, there used to be a gasp in the crowd when his arm went up. You know, it was a trademark, wasn't it? And I have to say, you know, some people hate driving, they hate the firing game and so on, but to see it done well is an absolute joy. I was lucky enough to play with and against David Bryan, and the amazing thing was, I've told lots of people this, was that as his arm came through when he was driving, you could tell that bowl was on target before it even left his hand, because his action was so good, and you could see his arm come through, and you knew that the bowl wasn't going to skew or wobble. It just came out. And the other one, Peter Bellis, again, who I've been lucky enough to play against. Peter Bellis's firing is just an art form. How anybody can make firing look as elegant and stylish as Peter Bellis did, it's just an absolute joy to watch.
I think there's another point, Amanda, as well, that may be getting a little bit technical, but it does make an impact. Because obviously, if you're playing a drive shot and you send it off at minute wrong angle, it's not going to hit the target. And our eyesight is all different. And if you point your finger out and close one eye and then close the other and see where your finger moves, you know, you'll be able to assess where your eyesight and what way your vision might affect you playing a drive shot. So it's something, again, that with an experienced coach will go through things like that. So you work out what is the best formula for you and where you should be standing on the mat, how you should be gripping the ball, your mental approach to playing the shot and committing to the shot, and then more importantly, where you're looking at and where you want to put the ball, the target, what you want to aim at from a target point of view. These are all things that if you get that right, you'll get better at playing the drive shot.
Fantastic.
It's also about keeping a record. So when you're practicing, most people will be better on the forehand or the backhand at drive, and it's really important to keep those stats, and that way you can build up a record and a pattern and understand where your strengths are and where your areas of development are. But the one tip that I would give to people is the common mistake that people make is rather than changing just one of the attributes of line and length, they change both. So in other words, you know, if you're going to go with a drive, play the same way, adjust your line if you've missed. Don't change both, because then you're starting from square one.
Mm.
I think
it's
that's
interesting, Ellen, isn't it? Isn't it interesting about the difference in the men and ladies game? Traditionally, it's changing quite dramatically now, but traditionally the ladies game didn't really have it wasn't as aggressive as the men's game. Of course, that's changed dramatically now, especially at the top end. But I think even at club bowls and county bowls, I would say you could make a generalisation that shot is not played as much by the ladies as it is by the men. And the reality is that it should be, because the game is the same, the situations are the same. And so it either comes down to a number of things. One, the confidence to be able to play that shot, the embarrassment of playing it with regards to people frowning upon you playing the shot when they shouldn't be. There isn't any physical reason why a lady can't put a ball down at an incredible pace, because if you get your technique right, it can go down there just as fast as a man can put it down. So it's quite interesting. There's differences in the men and women's game in that regard, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's where coaches have a really important role to play, you know, not only in terms of helping to develop individuals, but change that culture and the perception within the clubs that they're working with. So I think that's a big difference. I think mixed bowls has helped John, to be honest, right. You know, around playing and learning against, you know, I'd say that, you know, that's the big advice that I would always give, is play with and against better people. That only improves your standard of play. It helps you to think about different elements. And that to me is where I've learned all the different shots. It's been through playing mostly with men and others. But I would say there has been a shift. You know, the new generation of bowlers that are coming through, they absolutely have got all the shots and have got the confidence to play it. So I think that it is changing. definitely, but I think that coaches have got a massive role to play in seeing that change come through to a conclusion.
Brian, just another question. Brian, I'm just going to ask Brian a question on short mat, because we talked earlier about people sort of switching hands and leaning out, and it's true that in short mat, sometimes to be able to play a heavy shot, you've got to avoid the stick in the middle, right? So the only way you can do that is to somehow swing it from an outside in action or a backhand across yourself in order to miss the stick and get pace. Is that right?
Yeah, that's very correct. And to be honest, in short mat, you've got to be able to drive as lead, because if you're going into a tied game and you've got the first wood from the last end, the object of the game then is to ditch that jack. And you ditch that jack, but it's controlled weight, because you want your wood to stay with the jack in the ditch.
Right.
So it cannot be beaten. So you'll find that we are playing heavyweight very often right from the first wood.
There you go. Well, let's move on, because we've got a very familiar theme here with the next question. Robin Garth wrote in and said that they've been bowling for approximately 2 years and is keen to improve their accuracy of achieving the correct line. Is there a practice drill they can use to achieve the correct line consistently? And I think that's the familiar theme coming through, isn't it? Consistency. So it's very similar to some earlier questions, but this time, let's see who could give us some examples. So John Redlaw, have you got an example for line?
Yes. Now, obviously, when we try and improve our line or our consistency of our line bowling, we're talking about one of the two dimensions here. So the two dimensions are pace and line, and obviously the third one, luck. But the dimension of line, when you do practices and drills for this, the weight doesn't really matter. So you're just talking about the accuracy of your ability to put that bowl down on the line that you want. And I've done this with beginners, and again, I've done it with young children. I've done this with 6 and 7 year olds, where maybe just about a meter in front of the mat, let's say on the forehand, you place 2 plastic cups, and you might put them 2 feet apart, and you ask the player to bowl through that gap, to score a goal through that gap. And that will, because it's quite easy, everybody will achieve that one. So you make it a little bit harder, and you put the cups a little bit closer together. And then what you can do is you can build another one into it to make it a little bit harder, to move the 2 cups further away from the mat. Again, make it nice and easy to score that goal first, but then bring them closer and closer. Now, I've done this with 6 and 7 year olds who reliably can get the little junior age bowls through a gap of 9-10 inches. So that's a really good one for practicing your line. Now, also it throws up a really good diagnostic here, because some people, when they try and bowl through the center of that gap between the 2 cups, they'll find that they always hit one of the cups, or they're always towards the left cup or always towards the right cup. And what that usually means is there's a diagnostic problem there where, for instance, their bowl is wobbling, so it takes it out one way towards one of the other cups, or of course where they're facing. So their stepping is just wrong, so they need to adjust their foot angle as well. Now, the second exercise is really good for line, is to place 1 cup, you could make it a mini cone, a pollard, on the shoulder of the arc. You can do this indoor or outdoor, and you're trying to bowl as close to that cone or the cup as you can, just on the outside of it, to get you focused to where that shoulder of the arc is. And actually, that's very, very difficult for any of us. It's a high-level drill, that one, to try and aim just outside the cup. So there's 2 exercises there that people might like to try.
Right. Mal, do you have any?
Yeah, John and I have both used this drill, and I took it a stage further with the girls I was working with the Warwickshire side. So you're talking about slightly better place. I wanted to challenge them a little bit more. Used the same drill, started off with 2 cones about 7 or 8 meters away, gradually made things smaller until I gave them the ultimate test to see if everything was working. And the other reality was I wanted to see whether their delivery was consistent. And I actually asked them, could you please bowl it between the cones, but could you do it with your eyes closed? And that was a real challenge to them. But again, it's about mental preparation, seeing the picture, seeing the line that they actually wanted, making sure that their stance on the mat was correct. And therefore, then all they had to do was make sure that the pendulum came down that line and they could actually hit the target. Surprisingly, they were quite good.
Well, I'm going to use that because some of the guys that I play with would do better playing with their eyes closed. I'm going to use that. That's a good one.
Has anyone got anything else to add on that one? Excellent. Okay, let's move on then. This is the last question of this session, in fact. So it's a question from Professor Ranjan Chetty, and he asks whether the panel recommends a straight back and forward pendulum delivery with no forearm rotation or pronation, taking the bowl back, and supination of the forearm on the forward delivery motion. What I'll say is it's very similar to another question we had from Ian Bates, who said, help please, I'm right-handed when I bowl forehand indoors. I get an involuntary twist of my wrist on delivery. If we assume normal delivery is on the plane, i.e. right angles to the body, the twist rotates the hand to the vertical. It does not happen on the backhand or outdoors forehand. Extreme concentration does not help, and on the rare occasion it does work, length and distance are forgotten. Any ideas will be appreciated, as a one-handed bowler is not much use to my team. Any ideas? John Rednall.
Yeah, again, I refer to David Bryant, who used to have the twist in his delivery action, and he was saying that if you stand upright and you just swing your arm backwards, the natural movement of your arm is for your wrist to move and slightly twist. And, you know, that was one of the, we have to say, successful parts of his delivery because of his successes, full stop. But, you know, everybody's different, and I think it would be wrong to coach people to do that. I think it's just something that evolves if it evolves.
All great players have a twist, don't they? All great players have a twist in their delivery.
Well,
is that
I was
right?
going to say, I know a couple of people on this panel who might have a little bit of a twist, and I'm going to pass to one of them now, Mal.
What's that saying? Is it don't do as I do? Yeah, well, we won't go into that. But to answer the question, obviously, from a coaching point of view, we're looking to create a pendulum action so that the arm goes straight back and straight through. But as John Rednall alluded to, when you take your arm back, there is ever such a slight tendency for your wrist to actually rotate. It makes it comfortable for the arm to go back. I don't have any problems with that, provided that we don't have excess rotation, which means obviously the arm pronates going backwards, which means you've turned your hand over. The problem with that is getting your hand back to being square at the point of release then becomes difficult. So teaching a pendulum action from back to front, where the arm goes in a straight line with a straight arm, is far easier to be able to do than anything to do with rotation. Well, one of our coaching mantras is very simple, as I said, is at the point of release, the hand should come through, follow through down the aiming line. And it's a twee little thing to say, but say, catch the raindrops, because that means that your palm has successfully released the ball on plane and your hand goes through up to the sky, which means that there's been no rotation in your wrist whatsoever. Now, some players will rotate after they release the ball. I have no problem with that because the ball is already on its way. But if trying to get the ball back square, if we've actually rotated our hand backwards, it becomes quite difficult for people who are beginners. People like John Mack, who've got that, are consistent about it. and they are able to get the ball back on, to quote the technical term, back on plane all the time. But for me, let's keep it as simple as we can. Take your arm back in a straight line, pendulum action, release the ball, catch the raindrops, and there will be relatively little problems in releasing the ball in the way that it should be.
I think you make some really great points there, Mal. You know, for anyone who's watching this, who's an experienced bowler and they do naturally bring their arm back, which I do, and twist. It is about, if you are going to analyse it, it's about doing a freeze frame using the video tools that we talked about earlier to look at that point of release. We've all watched on YouTube, on the TV, so many talented bowlers over the world have all sorts of different things that they do with their delivery. But actually, if you analyse it, the bit that makes them stand out is that point of release, as Mal has said, and being on the plane. So that's the bit, really big bit to concentrate on, ensuring that bit is consistently straight at the point of release.
The same could be said in a sport like golf as well, Ellen, couldn't it? And Mal, I mean, there's lots of examples of golfers who, you know, when they take the club away, there's all sorts of things happen with the club, but at that point of impact, when they actually strike the golf ball, it's normally a copybook to someone that has a more traditional sort of swing. So same sort of principle.
Yeah. So we're not saying to people that if you aren't doing a straight pendulum that you need to change if you're already playing. It's about adapting what you've got. What we're saying is, from a principle of a new bowler, the ideal model is to deliver, you know, with a straight pendulum. Yeah,
all sorts of different strange things happen after you've been playing 5 or 6 years, doesn't it? Especially when you get some gremlins in there. But when you're starting it, let's keep it nice and simple.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's a really great point to make, Mal, is that actually, if we're talking about good practice, we'd all video ourselves regularly, because you know, that's how bad habits creep in when you constantly repeat them. So it is a good idea to kind of just check and just say, well, am I doing that differently? Am I coming up a bit quicker here? Oh, that didn't look as smooth as what it probably could do. And sometimes you might feel something, that seeing it then reinforces it and helps you to be able to diagnose. And it's a great talking point, you know, with your coach.
Also very interesting that some countries have had very direct coaching on a standard type of delivery. I remember Malaysia, when I was playing World Championships, had a standard delivery that they were all taught, they were all coached. But for most of us, our delivery action is unique. You know, you could look at a green full of players and you won't see the same delivery action twice. And, you know, we mentioned this word earlier, of routine. I remember leading against the great Ian Taylor of Australia, whose delivery action was just unlike anything else, in that it went round and round and out and in and everything else. And I was sort of looking at the green, wondering where his bowl was, and it was still going round and round in his hand. But he was a great player, and he did the same thing every time.
I was fortunate this last summer to be able to coach the Hong Kong Youth Development Squad, who were over during the National Championships. Had them at my club. And we're doing a set of drills, and it was really just incredible to watch. If you could have just sort of chopped their heads off, put them all in a line, you'd have seen exactly the same delivery in every single player, whether it was male or female, because of the system that they've actually come through. Now, if that works for them, it works for them. But as Ellen and John quite rightly said, we're all different. We're also slightly different sizes. And that is also something you have to factor in order to be able to get the ball to release where you want to. So therefore, there's no right or wrong way, but there is usually a sensible way to be. And I really reiterate, when you're starting, we need to keep it as simple as possible rather than make it complicated.
And on that note, thank you for your time. It's been a really good session, and hopefully people will enjoy listening to it. So thanks, everybody, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.